Hello and welcome to my channel, In Search of Wonder. My name is Anne and this is my November TBR. For November, I have decided that I want to largely do mood reading. However, there are 4 year-long events that I am participating in, and I've made it all the way to November in all of them, and I don't want to give up on any of them now. So I'm definitely going to be still reading specific books for those 4 challenges. But for the rest of whatever I manage to read in the month of November, I am largely going to be reading what I want to read. There are a couple potential holdovers from October's reading plan, including some books that I picked up from the library, a couple nonfiction books, as well as a couple of cozy mysteries. There are some Victorian books that I am carrying over possibly into November. I really do want to read A Tale of Two Cities or Our Mutual Friend by Charles Dickens. Both of those are high on my list of books by him that I want to read. And I was kind of intending to get to that this October, but I never did. So I do want to possibly read those in November. But I also picked up Shirley by Charlotte Bronte in October for Victober, which was a bit of a last minute decision. And so that one I am reading slowly a little bit at a time. I don't know how much it will take me into November, so I may just end up doing that and nothing else. So as far as Victorian reading goes for this time of year, but we'll see. We'll see what happens with that. Other than that, again, like I said, I have my 4 annual challenges that I'm doing, and then I'm going to participate in Danny Dabble's TBR game for the month of November, possibly into December, and that is the Bucket Listathon. And I'm looking forward to that, but that one is pretty open-ended. So it fits well with my mood reading plans. And I think that it will just add a little bit of fun and variety to my mood reading and maybe give me a little bit of direction, because I do need some direction when it comes to my mood reading. Otherwise, I can't make up my mind. Too many options and I don't know what to do. So I like to have something that kind of guides my choices. So let's get into, first of all, my 4 must-reads for the month of November. And we'll start with the most important one, which is my choice for the Reading the Classics challenge, which is my challenge. So the challenge, or the prompt rather, for the month of November is to read an essay or a book of essays. And I chose that because November is typically nonfiction November, traditionally here on YouTube. Now it is no longer an official event as far as I know, but so many people are used to reading nonfiction in November that it's still kind of a thing. So that's why I put that for the November challenge. And also I had in the back of my mind a couple of particular essays that I specifically wanted to read. I'll tell you about those in a minute. First of all, I just want to define, for the purposes of this challenge, exactly what I mean by essays, because it seems like a simple term on the surface, but it can be a little bit difficult actually to pinpoint exactly what it means. So just to give you a little bit of guidance as you are making your plans for November, if you haven't made them already, in my mind, an essay is at its simplest a short piece of nonfiction. So that means it's not full-length book size. So I think really anything more than, let's say, 200-ish pages, 250, definitely over 250, I think is moving beyond essay size. On the other hand, a book could be a collection of essays. And that's where it gets really tricky, because is each chapter a separate essay, or are all of the chapters interdependent on each other, in which case that would be a longer work of nonfiction and not a book of essays. So if each chapter can be read independently of itself as a separate essay, then it would be a book of essays. But if they're interdependent, then it would be a larger nonfiction work. So hopefully that gives a little guidance. With this definition, that kind of broadens a little bit your options because it doesn't necessarily have to be called essays or categorized as essays. It just has to be a short work of nonfiction. So that could include speeches, which honestly are very often essays or papers that are spoken, but then a lot of times they are preserved as written. So it's like an essay. To that end, sermons are very much the same thing. So there are many classic collections of sermons by Puritan preachers and by, for example, Jonathan Edwards or Charles Haddon Spurgeon, many others. So that's also an option if you want to read more religious work. Some autobiographical works have been occasionally classified as essays by some people. Like I have seen people refer to Confessions by Augustine as essays, a series of essays about his life. I've not actually read it front to back myself, so I don't really know. Thomas à Kempis's The Imitation of Christ can be similar, like those books that are kind of more devotional in nature, that have shorter passages that are independent, that can be read of their own accord, could also technically qualify for that. So it's really broad. It's not limited to a specific set of works that are classified per se as essays, in my mind. There's a lot of flexibility here. So hopefully that frees up your search a little bit if you were concerned about that. But if you want to stick to, books that are, or works that are specifically sold as essays, that is perfectly fine as well. And again, these are all classics, so they need to be published on or before 1975. So that's at least 50 years old. As far as my recommendations go for that, I do have a few recommendations of essays that have been particularly meaningful and impactful to me in my life and memorable. There are some essays I've read that really have stuck with me and have given me a shift in viewpoint, or clarified something for me, or expressed my own thoughts so perfectly and so eloquently. So the ones that I'm thinking of that come to mind immediately. Now, I haven't read a great deal of essays, honestly, so I haven't read too many more besides the ones that I'm going to mention here, but all the ones that I've read, or a lot of the ones I've read, really have been very impactful. So essays can be a really powerful, hitting a piece of nonfiction. So anyway, the first one that I want to mention is Live Not by Lies by Alexander Solzhenitsyn, who wrote that just before or as he was being kicked out of Russia for his political views and for his works, his literary works. And that was a really meaningful essay to me several years ago when I read it. I think it is a must read for anyone who is a citizen of a country, which I think is most of us, if not every single one of us. So I think it is a really important and impactful read that the title has become something of a motto for me, Live Not by Lies. And then Art and the Bible by Francis Schaeffer is a short little book, and its subtitle is 2 essays, I think, on something. I don't know what the rest of the subtitle is, but I know it's 2 essays. So I found that book to be incredibly helpful years ago when I was embarking on the task of teaching music appreciation to high schoolers, and I wanted to give them a framework for being able to objectively evaluate art, particularly music, in some way other than I like it or I don't like it, which is incredibly subjective. I wanted to give them some objective means of evaluating art in general, but music in particular. And that book was super helpful in guiding me in my own evaluation of art, but also in being able to teach that to my students as well. So Art in the Bible by Francis Schaeffer. And he has other books, I think, short works of nonfiction that I think would also qualify as essays as well. Some other titles. And then on Fairy Stories by J.R.R. Tolkien. Quite a few years ago, well, not quite, like 3, 4 maybe years ago, I went through the fairy tales course at Hillsdale College. They have some free online courses. And there's one about fairy tales that I took and really enjoyed it. And one of the course reading materials was this essay by J.R.R. Tolkien on fairy stories. In that essay, J.R.R. Tolkien coined a term that people use to this day called eucatastrophe. And eucatastrophe is, this may be too simplistic because I haven't refreshed my memory on the specific meaning of it and exactly what Tolkien was trying to say by it. But my understanding is that it's a point in the story, usually towards the end, where something that caused great suffering in a character's life actually brings about the greatest joy and like the happy ending in the story. And it's a very biblical concept. Think of, for example, the suffering of Christ that leads to the joy of many people, something along those lines. That's my understanding of the term. And a lot of people will use that terminology in discussing certain stories and types of stories. And it's kind of become, I don't know about a common term, but a term that's still used to this day. And then a book that I have an actual copy of is Gift from the Sea by Anne Morrow Lindbergh, which is a collection of essays that she wrote when she was on vacation by the sea, and she would see, for example, a shell washed up onto the beach, and that would inspire some thoughts in her, and she would write a little essay about it. And they're interconnected with her themes about life and relationships. It's all very specifically from a feminine perspective, which makes it very meaningful for women who read it. And let me see, I'm trying to see if there's something on the blurb in the back that might explain it a little bit more eloquently than I am managing to do right now. In a blend of complete sincerity and delicacy, Anne Morrow Lindbergh shares with her readers her awareness of the many frustrating elements we face today. The restlessness, the unending pressures and demands, the denial of leisure and silence, the threat to inner peace and integration, the uneasy balance of the opposites, man and woman. With radiant lucidity, she makes visible again the values of the inner life, without which there's no true fulfillment. She does this without the overtones of preaching, but herself as a seeker, echoing only clearer and stronger our own small, still voice. So there was quite a bit in this book that I underlined and highlighted and wrote down because I wanted to remember it was very beautifully said and very insightful. And then another one, and I read this many, many years ago. It was very impactful then, and every time I read it after that, it's very convicting. And that is one sermon in particular by Jonathan Edwards called Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God. Now, he has many other sermons that I would like to read because I have heard other preachers and theologians mention them as being very impactful and important to them in their walk with the Lord. So I would like to read some other sermons by Jonathan Edwards, but in particular, that one was one sermon that was profoundly used by God in the Great Awakening in the United States at that time. And it still is available today in print, and it still is very convicting when you read it. And then one that I started a couple years ago, and I haven't actually finished it because it is the sort of thing that you don't have to read through. It's called John Plowman's Talk by Charles Haddon Spurgeon. And these are just short, many very practical, pithy little essays about various points of life and the Christian walk and Charles Haddon Spurgeon's thoughts on them. Let me give you some of the titles. Patience, Gossips, Keeping Your Eyes Open, Thoughts About Thought, Faults, Debt, Hope, Spending, etc. Topics like that. And each one is just a few pages long, 3 to 5 pages, and has his trademark humor and his trademark common sense. His goal in these little short talks were to be just very down to earth, as if he was talking to regular old Joe Schmo or John Plowman, and just sharing his common sense wisdom with them. So that is that book by Charles Haddon Spurgeon. Those are the ones that I have read and personally can recommend. Then there are some essays. If you were to look up what are some highly recommended essays, I was at my library and I picked up a couple collections. These often are kind of like the cream that rises to the top as far as recommendations go. So these are ones that I can safely recommend only because they have a solid reputation and they're classics and many people have read them and love them. And I intend to, at some point, someday, They're not making it to my shortlist for this November, but these are all on my radar as ones that I will eventually want to read. Now, if I have time, I may actually pick up and read one or two of the ones in these because it sounds interesting. This is Of Other Worlds, Essays and Stories by C.S. Lewis. And the first half is essays, the second half is little short stories. His essays are on stories, on 3 ways of writing for children. Sometimes fairy stories may say best what's to be said. That's one I might want to read. On juvenile tastes, it all begins with a picture. On criticism, on science fiction, a reply to Professor Haldane, and Unreal Estates. So those are all essays on writing and literature in this book by C.S. Lewis. And then we have a collection by Oscar Wilde. I love this copy that the library had. They don't usually have such beautiful hard copies. This is a cloth bound. Beautiful and Impossible Things. Selected essays of Oscar Wilde. What art really reveals to us is nature's lack of design, her curious crudities, her extraordinary monotony, her absolutely unfinished condition. And some of the titles of essays in here are The House Beautiful, Dinners and Dishes, Shakespeare on Scenery, Hamlet at the Lyceum, Count Tolstoy's War and Peace, The American Invasion, Aristotle Afternoon Tea, London Models, The Decay of Lying Observation, The Soul of Man Under Socialism, Preface to the Picture of Dorian Gray, A Few Maxims for the Instruction of the Overeducated, that would probably be funny, Phrases and Philosophies for the Use of the Young, The Case of Warder Martin, Some Cruelties of Prison Life. And so a couple of these seem to be literary essays, which I think would be particularly of interest. So there's that one. And I think there are other essay collections by Oscar Wilde as well. Then we have, this is probably one of the most famous collections of essays, at least by American authors, and that's Walden by Henry David Thoreau. And these are his writings that he wrote when he was living in a cabin at Walden Pond in Massachusetts. And these were very influential in the culture of the early 1800s, or the mid 1800s, I should say, in the United States of America. And it's one of the most popular books of essays ever since it was written. So it doesn't seem like you can go wrong with that. And I think he starts with nature, but I think he's, there's also philosophical wonderings as well in there. And then we have George Orwell, a collection of essays. And I think these probably are a lot on political topics, but there are also some on literary topics. For example, Charles Dickens and Rudyard Kipling. So I think those could be of interest as well to a reader. Additionally, I just want to mention that you can find Charles Spurgeon's sermons online. There are actually multiple websites that have all of his sermons on there, and so you can read them directly online. So just read one of those and you will have knocked off this prompt for this month. I will try to remember to link to one of those sites in the description box when I upload this video. And I'm sure you similarly, I've never looked for them, but I'm sure you could also find Jonathan Edwards sermons, for example, John Owen's sermons, etc. Any famous preacher of the past who has printed sermons, I'm sure you would be able to find them on the internet somewhere. So those are my recommendations. As to the books that I particularly want to read for this challenge, I actually do have 2 in mind. One is an essay by C.S. Lewis that is not in the book that I showed you, and that is An Experiment on Criticism. And that essay was actually in the back of my mind when I chose this prompt, because I've been wanting to read it for a while, and I just need something to prompt me to read it. So that one is going on my short list, and I'm hoping to get to it in November. So that is An Experiment in Criticism, which is about literary criticism and from C.S. Lewis's perspective. And it has been very impactful for a lot of people in their reading life and in developing their ability to read closely. So I am interested and anxious to read that one. Another one I want to read is, and this has made an appearance on my TBR more than once. So I'm determined this November, I'm going to read it. I'm at least going to read the Of Education one because that is particular of importance to me. This is 2 essays, or actually speeches, by John Milton, and one is Areopagitica, which I'm not actually even sure what that one is about, but the second one is Of Education, and that one in particular is the one that I am interested in reading. I've heard really good things about it. It is a famous essay by John Milton. So it's going to be read this November. This is the one that's going on my TBR. So this one and Experiment in Criticism are the first two must reads on my pile for November. Now, I just want to mention that I also have a scavenger hunt aspect to my reading challenge. And for the scavenger hunt, you are supposed to find mentions of nature, education, and philosophy in the essays that you read. And it's probably not going to be super hard to get 2 out of the 3 of those, because if you read nature-based essays or education-based essays, they're going to be philosophical, so you can knock off the philosophical one. To get all 3 in one essay might be a little bit tricky, but if there's any reference in the essay to nature in any way, shape, or form, that fits. And ditto for education. So you might be able to knock all 3 of those out. I am aiming for the education and philosophy items. We'll see if I can knock off the nature element as well. And then I have the challenge aspect of my reading challenge. And for November, that is to make a list of 10 books that you want to read next year. So I am hoping to have a video in the next couple of weeks that will detail my list of 10 books that I want to read in 2026. Will I actually, I'm not going to promise that I'm going to read them. No, because the minute I start saying I'm going to read this specific list of books, that's the minute my heart rebels and says, no, I don't want to stick to that list. Like a month at a time to give me focus for a short period of time, I can handle that. But any kind of long term, like you must read these books in the course of this year, I'm going to be like, no, I'm not going to do that. So I will make a list, but I don't promise to stick to it. So that is for my Reading the Classics challenge, the books that I'm going to read and the books that I recommend. So let's move on to the other must reads that I have for my November TBR. The next challenge that I am reading from is the Jane Austen 250th anniversary celebration that Charlene and I are hosting. And we are getting to the last full-length novel by Jane Austen that we have on schedule to read this year. And that is Northanger Abbey. Now, I have read Northanger Abbey a couple of times. Oh, what am I kidding? I've read all of them a couple of times. This is my third read for this one. And the first time I was like, okay, that was fine, but all right. The second time, I thought it was hilarious and so funny. So I am looking forward to seeing what I think about it this time. And I'm also looking forward to reading the annotated edition, because the annotated edition so far in the Jane Austen books that I have been reading this year have just been wonderful. I've learned so much about Jane Austen's writing and her perspective and some of the things that she included in her books, the vocabulary that she is using. It's all been super helpful and I've really enjoyed it. So looking forward to finishing it up with Northanger Abbey. The other challenge that I'm doing is the Read Your Shelf Challenge by Chantel. And her prompt for the month of November is food. And I've struggled so much with her prompts this year. I don't know why. They should be easy, but I have struggled. And I only have one book on my shelf that fits this prompt of food. Only one in all my books. And that is Elemenopy. But I'm actually really looking forward to it because I've heard great things. I think that I'm really going to enjoy this, and I think it will be a pretty quick read. And so I think it will be perfect for the month of November. And it has a bee, and for that matter, it has a fish. So food. And then for Jeanette's Jane Reads Christian Fiction Challenge, the prompt for November is a book that's new to my TBR. And I just picked up this book at a book festival a month ago or so. So that is a pretty recent addition to my TBR, my physical TBR. It's called A Love Restored by Kelly Goshorn. It had made it to my shortlist for my October TBR, but I never got to it. So I am looking forward to actually reading it in November, because there is a possibility I might end up at another book fair festival coming up here soon. And if I can have this book read before I get there, Kelly Goshorn is going to be one of the authors at that festival. So it's like an author pop-up at a coffee shop not too far from me. So I can go there and say, hey, I read your book. So I need to read this one for that challenge. So those are all of the books that I'm committing myself to for the month of November. The essay by C.S. Lewis, the essay by John Milton, and then A Love Restored by Kelly Goshorn, Northanger Abbey by Jane Austen, and Elemental P. So that should be fun. The longest one of those is Northanger Abbey, and Northanger Abbey is Austen's shortest novel. So this should be like easy peasy, right? Other than that, I am participating in Danny Dabble's Bucket Listathon. So this is where you work on finishing up your TBR, like your TBR goals for the month or for the year of 2025. And so I'm just doing the physical TBR. She has a whole game that sounds so much fun, and I'm going to do some elements of it, but she also is very clear about just making it your own. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to start over here on the physical TBR side and work through it however I feel like it, however the spirit leads in the moment, and just work through it and use these prompts on here to give me some direction in my reading choices for the month of November beyond my 4 picks of must reads. But then she does have, periodically, she has a couple different places on the game board. She has these stacks of books. And so if you land on the stack of books, what you're supposed to do is choose from your list of must reads. So I made my list of must reads, and I may pull from these in general for all of my reading for this reading challenge in November, or I may pick some other books because I have so many that I could read. I may choose other ones, but these are ones that I do want to read that are on my physical TBR, and I do want to read them. So I have 3 different categories. The first one is vintage books. This year I have been picking up vintage books like crazy for some reason, and so I have a few I really want to read. The first one is Thorny Hold by Mary Stewart, which I picked up most recently at the library book sale. And I don't know much about it, but I know a lot of people talk about Mary Stewart as a vintage, I think romantic suspense kind of writer. And so I am looking forward to trying this one. I think she's also written like some Arthurian legends, stories, which are of interest also. So anyway, there's that one. And then Silver Hill by Phyllis Whitney, again, like a romantic suspense, kind of, it gives me Daphne du Maurier vibes. I don't know if that's accurate, but there's that one. And then I have Claire Darcy, Letty by Claire Darcy. Claire Darcy is not the name of the book. Letty is the name of the book. Claire Darcy is the author. A romantic novel set in Regency England and the glittering Vienna of the Great Congress. So that looks interesting to me. Daughter of Eve, a novel about Pocahontas by the author of The Conqueror's Wife, Noelle B. Gerson. And Noelle B. Gerson wrote something else that I have read that I can't remember now what it was. I don't remember, and I'm not gonna look it up at the moment. But anyways, there's that one. And then finally, I have this vintage copy of a Georgette Hare that I've never read before, The Quiet Gentleman. So that is a possibility as well. And then the next 5 that I have are historical fiction that are particularly about specific historic people. So I'm going to quickly go through this list. Mrs. Lincoln's Dressmaker by Jennifer Ciavarini. It would be great if I could read this because I've had this on my shelf for a really long time, and it's time to read it and or get rid of it. The Personal Librarian, which has made an appearance on my TBR more than once. I went to the library mentioned in this book earlier this year. Really want to read this book. Miss Spitfire about Annie Sullivan, who was Helen Keller's teacher. This also has been on my TBR already. I really want to read it. This has also been on my TBR, Bronte. I've been on a bit of a Charlotte Bronte kick. I find that every few years I go on a Bronte kick and I read everything I can read about the Brontes. I've not yet exhausted all that is out there, and this is on my shelf just waiting to be read. And finally, A Mask of Honor, which is, unlike these 4, is actually about 2 men who were real men in American history from the Mason family, I believe, the George Mason family. And this is by Sharon Burtz, a local author to me. So also, I've been wanting to read this for a couple years now. So I need to read it. And finally, I picked some nonfiction to put on that list. I have How to Read a Book. I started this many years ago, and I read maybe the first 2 chapters, and that's as far as I got. I would like to read the whole thing. I think it would be very beneficial as a reader. So looking forward to that. Live Your Truth and Other Lies by Elisa Childers, which one of my siblings gave me for Christmas, I think. And I also want to read her other book, Another Gospel, but I actually have a copy of this one. So I'll start there. And I follow her on YouTube and Facebook. I don't watch all of her videos, but I do enjoy her perspective and listening to the conversations she has with people. So I really want to read that book. And then The Body Keeps the Score. I started this again several years ago. It was a little bit too much for me at the time, but I think it gets better. I think the part that I was reading was giving some examples of people's traumatic past, and that's the part that was really hard for me. But I think going forward, it might start to get a little more clinical, I hope. So anyway, I do want to read this though. And then my oldest son is a junior in high school, so I think I probably should read this book, Debt-Free Degree, because we are starting to talk college now, and this is becoming a pressing issue. And then I read Heaven by Randy Alcorn a couple years ago, and it was one of my top favorite nonfiction books ever. So I'm looking forward to also reading Happiness by Randy Alcorn. This has made an appearance on my TBR as well before. Who knows if I will get to it. So I have a bunch of other books that I may or may not get to in the month of November, but these are the ones that I'm mostly going to be picking from, and the books I'm definitely going to be reading in the case of the 4 to 5 must-reads that I have. So those are my plans for November and my recommendations for the Reading the Classics Challenge. Let me know in the comments what you are planning to read for the month of November, what books you have on deck. What did you find in the way of essays? Did I make any recommendations that seem of interest to you, or are there others that you would like to read, or are there essays you've read that you would like to recommend to other people? Please let me know in the comments and let other people who are watching this video in the comments know your thoughts about that. And I will see you next time. Happy reading. Bye.